Hello and welcome to Cycles of Time, your weekly guide to what's happening on Earth as we make our revolutionary journey around the sun. For time immemorial, our human ancestors have created myths and meanings to help us adapt and thrive as seasons change. Join me each week to explore the intersections of these ancient cycles, from the indigenous medicine wheel to the pagan wheel of the year, the Babylonian and Greek zodiac to the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes. I'm your host, Alison, and this is the Cycles of Time podcast. Welcome here, everyone. This is episode 1 of Cycles of Time, where we'll be tracking the passage of the seasons through each week from various vantage points, cultures, and perspectives. This is your weekly forecast for the week of March 18th to 24th, Monday through Sunday, 2024. Spring is arriving. A little outline of the week ahead, which I'll give you each week in the beginning of the episode. We'll start with the medicine wheel direction, which is the east. We are in the 5-element cycle, element wood. We are celebrating Spring Equinox or vernal equinox here in the Northern Hemisphere on Tuesday, March 19th. It is the pagan holy day of Ostara on Tuesday, March 19th to correspond with the equinox. We are also moving from the zodiac sign Pisces into Aries on March 19th as the sun enters Aries, as it does every year on the spring equinox. We're in the moon phase of waxing moon, working our way towards a full moon next week. And where the sun is transiting through the I Ching hexagram or human design gate 25, which is the gate of innocence. Thank you for all your listens and feedback on the pilot episode that came out last week. There I went through the who, what, and why for this podcast. So if you haven't listened to that, I recommend doing so. It's definitely not required, but because you can easily just jump in ahead, but it'll kind of give you a little bit of insight into who I am and why I'm doing this. I also recommend checking out the image I'm sharing in the show notes, which is a diagram that I put together showing how each of the cycles of time that we'll be exploring here on the podcast from different cultures and backgrounds aligns and syncs up with one another. I'm a very visual person. I'm an artist, and so I put this together last week and shared it on my Instagram at Cycles of Time Podcast on Instagram. And yeah, it's been really cool to kind of see some feedback on that for people who are a little bit more visual than auditory when we're talking about so many different systems at once. But you can go ahead and click on that in the show notes or visit cyclesoftimepodcast.com or on Instagram. And of course, if you are, on a run or laying down or taking a bath or driving, I definitely recommend not doing that at this moment. But if you happen to be on your computer or on your phone and in a safe place to do so, I would say, go ahead and click that in the show notes. And while you're at it, go ahead and click subscribe too. Why not? Thanks. Hope to see you here each week. So logistics aside, I'll start this week by giving you a little download about the structure of the show, and then we'll dive right into the forecast of the energies that this week holds. And it's an exciting week ahead, I will tell you that. This week is Spring Equinox. It's kind of the big thing, starting the astrological new year, starting Aries season. And the first sign of the zodiac is starting out in earnest. So it's the sign of the enthusiastic and driven and energetic ram. And I'm definitely feeling spring in the air right now in a big way. I feel like people are coming out of their shells, starting stuff, making moves. Everywhere I look, there's just some new project being announced or an invitation to something. And it just feels like so different from the long, cold winter that I experienced here in the high desert in New Mexico. Yeah, and another thing that just happened, considering the cycles of time, was daylight savings time here where I live. And so we last week sprung the clock forward 1 hour. And a lot of people in my sphere have been grumbling a bit about how hard it's been to wake up over the past few days, especially all the parents of the little kids that I know. I have a 5-year-old daughter, and dropping her off at preschool over this past week has been kind of rough as far as just, oh man, like nobody's getting any sleep, which is kind of contradictory to the feeling of spring. So there's a little bit of this discomfort in the air that's kind of this push pill of like, am I ready to leave winter yet? What is this new hour of light? And it just doesn't always make sense. I remember, speaking of daylight savings time, I remember growing up that it was created to benefit farmers. I heard that. I feel like that was kind of the common mythology, and now I know that was definitely not the case. Daylight savings, I've found out more recently, was apparently suggested initially by Benjamin Franklin in the 18th century, and was really put into practice for industrialization and commercialization and commerce and the economy. So as the Industrial Revolution took hold after Benjamin Franklin suggested it, there was a standardization of time implemented to make railroads work efficiently. And before the railroads kind of going across Europe and the U.S. in the 1800s, there was not really a standard time zone or times. A lot of local towns, I read recently, would operate their own local time called a sun time, where they would decide the time according to where the sun was in their particular location. And in around the 1840s, railroads started to be built throughout towns in Europe and America with the Industrial Revolution. And so at that point, the powers that be created standard time. And another, 40 or 50 years later, a coalition of American businessmen created the time zones that we use today I'm in Mountain Time, but Pacific, Mountain, Central, Eastern. Those were all created in the late 1800s. And then in the 1900s, the early 1900s, daylight savings time took hold in Europe and the U.S. I believe it started in Germany, but then spread to all kind of Western European countries and the United States in order to theoretically save on energy costs and reap the economic benefits of people being out and about later in the day rather than sleeping in the morning. So I learned a lot about this from a New York Times article that recently came out about daylight savings time, and a few more factoids that I thought were interesting about that, since we're on the subject of time here, are that China, India, and Russia don't use daylight savings time at all. So considering how big and wide the countries are, it'll be the same exact time in Beijing as in Tibet or Western China. And that's just super fascinating. I'm like, maybe I do like these time zones. I don't know. But yeah, Hawaii doesn't use daylight savings time. Arizona doesn't use daylight savings time. And in 2022, Mexico, the country of Mexico, ended daylight savings time. But it carved out an exception for the area along the United States border. In the EU, the European Union, and several states in the U.S. like California and Florida and Ohio, they have all considered dropping it, or it's on the ballot to drop daylight savings time, because there have been a lot of studies that it is not actually benefiting the economy very much at all. And actually, it's just not good for us. In 2020, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine actually made a public call for the abolition of daylight savings time because it disrupts our natural clock, our body's natural clock, and could cause a risk of stroke and heart attack and cardiovascular events, and also lead to more traffic accidents. So I don't know how you all feel about daylight savings, but I just think it's pretty interesting that right around the time when spring is beginning, based on the cycles of the Earth and the rotation of the Earth around the sun, the equinox, we're kind of doing this abnormal, completely fabricated shift in time. And so it's really kind of throws people off, I think. I don't love it. It's kind of just not natural, and it has a very, capitalistic history that just feels kind of wrong. It reminds me, I spoke in the last episode about the Gregorian calendar a little bit and how it really just messed up the natural cycles of time. And similar to daylight savings time, it's done for economic and power-driven reasons. So not my favorite. But I guess if I had to look at a silver lining, it has been really nice to look out the window at dinner time lately and see the sun still high up in the sky. My daughter's been roller skating around our backyard and laying in the hammock. And so, it feels like an extra added boost of that evening spring energy. But then right now it's kind of snow sleeting. So we're definitely in that transitionary season. There's little crocuses and daffodils blooming already outside in my front yard. But then there's a little corn snow coming down on them. So it's this very visual symbol of how we're in just a big transition between Pisces and Aries and winter and spring. So anyway, spring. Here we are. We're going to dive into more details about that a little bit here. But first, I'll give you a little outline of the podcast format. I know most of the introduction was in my introductory episode as far as the philosophy and the why, but this will just be kind of a basic format for what you can expect each week. So the format will be a little bit different each week, or the order of the information, depending on what's happening in the cosmos and what's happening here on Earth with the seasons, but it'll follow this general order. So first, we'll start with the astronomical, the basic position of the sun in relation to the Earth. This really is the basics of all of the traditions and philosophies that I am discussing here in Cycles of Time podcast, because we are just, on a rock floating in space, orbiting around a giant star with other rocks and gaseous masses also circling around and doing this wild dance. And so, we'll start with just the kind of basic science of that a little bit. And then we'll move on to more of the cultural and philosophical. But what I do want to mention about the astronomical in relation to the astrological, or the science in related to the mythology, for example, is that we're looking at our place in the universe, and we're also looking at our place in time on this podcast. And our place in time allows us to look back through time through the lens and stories of our human ancestors. And of course, since when a lot of these cyclic philosophies that we're discussing here were channeled by people and created and had stories told about them and written about, we were hadn't experienced the scientific Copernican revolution yet, and didn't have the technology that we have today to look out into space with telescopes, and didn't have advanced physics and calculations. And so we were looking at these cycles from our point of view here on Earth. And I think that that's just a really important point to center in, because it's not like one is right and one is wrong per se, like we have a heliocentric awareness of the universe, of the solar system, where of course the Earth does rotate around the sun. However, from our point of view here on Earth, the sun is rotating across the ecliptic. It's rotating it's traveling through a invisible line in the sky, and all of the planets are also going around that same line from our perspective here on Earth. And so that's something to just really sink into, and it feels very simple even to explain this. But I think, this in the world of science versus spirituality, or kind of the empirical facts versus the woo, there's just a lot of gray area there now. I find that, we're not so certain that empirical science is the only way. With quantum physics, we now know that, the subjective observer has a huge place in how the physical world actually does work. And that is, the most modern kind of newest branch of physics, right? And so there's this fusion of ancient wisdom about our place in the universe with the technological awareness of how the world is working, how the universe is working. So in this podcast, because we're looking at ancient human traditions from around the world, we're going to also look at the Sun-Earth relationship from our point of view here on Earth. And the sun, the planets, and the moon are always moving through the same path in the sky. And this is through a line called the ecliptic. And I have a great video also in the show notes that I found that shows how this works, like how the sun is making an apparent orbit around the Earth and how the planets are making their apparent orbit around the Earth. So go ahead and watch that if you want a visual aid for it. And through this podcast, we're going to be tracing the sun as it makes its annual revolution around the Earth from our point of view on this ecliptic. And so after we kind of, get into the nuts and bolts of that each week, and we won't do too much astronomy or science at all, it's just important to reference. We're mostly then going to be focusing on the energies of the current week and how they'll affect your life, how they affect the collective energy through the lenses of different systems. And so if you are looking at my diagram now from the show notes, or if you've looked at it in the past, or even if you don't have it in front of you, I'll let you know how it works. Basically, I've taken the different systems, the medicine wheel, the whooshing 5-element cycle wheel from Taoism, and the pagan wheel of the year with 8 holy days, the zodiac, the tropical zodiac of 12 signs, and then the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, or 64 gates within human design. They're the same there. And I've put them in concentric circles. And so each week we'll look starting at the middle of that circle, which is the medicine wheel. And we'll kind of look at how, if we imagine the circle of the year, for example, all of these are breaking down the year into different divisions and different seasons. So if we imagine the circle of the year as a pie, different cultures throughout history have sliced up the pie in different ways. So with the medicine wheel, the ancient Siberian and indigenous Celtic North American medicine wheel, it is from all of these different cultures and different places. There are 4 cardinal directions on the medicine wheel, which divides the year into 4 slices of pie, which are the 4 distinct seasons of spring, summer, autumn, and winter, and the directions of east, south, west, and north. So that's a 4-slice pie that we'll begin with, kind of seeing which of those 4 seasons and directions we are in, and what other information we can pull from the medicine wheel for that direction. After that, we'll talk a little bit about the 5 elements of the whooshing cycle, which is a ancient Chinese Taoist system of thinking. And like the medicine wheel, the whooshing system actually divides the year into 4 main seasons as well. Spring, summer, autumn, winter are represented by wood, fire, metal, and water. So the seasons are represented by different elements. And there is a 5th element in this system, which is earth. And in the whooshing cycle, earth represents a period of late summer. It's kind of symbolic for summer. So summer would be split into fire as the main part of summer, and then earth as summer transitions into fall. But earth is also represented of the 4 times of the year when the seasons are transitioning from one to the other. So late winter into early spring, late spring into early summer, etc. Those are also represented by the element earth. So we can think of these two systems, the medicine wheel and the whooshing cycle, as 2 seasonal frameworks from different sides of the globe. And we'll be feeling into their parallels and their differences as we track the weeks. And so, each week won't be a new element or a new direction or a new season. Will be in them for a quarter of the year, essentially. But each week there might be a little bit more information that's relevant to how that's showing up in the current week. So after those 2 seasonal wheels, we'll move out 1 layer of the concentric circles into the pagan wheel of the year, the witch's wheel of the year, the neo-pagan, the Celtic. There's a lot of names for this, but it's the wheel of the year. If you search that on Google, you will probably find a lot of images for these 8 slices of the pie that I'm going to talk about here. So within this pagan wheel, there are 8 Sabbaths or holy days, and a Sabbath happens just about once about every 6.5 weeks throughout the year. So the pie of the year is equally divided into 8 parts. So it's divided also into spring, summer, and winter and fall, with the equinoxes and the solstices as the quarter days of the pagan wheel of the year. And then they're sliced, each of those quarters is sliced in half to a cross-quarter day that's halfway between each equinox and each solstice. So those are the 8 different celebrations and festivals of the pagan wheel of the year. You might be, if you're not familiar with this wheel, you've probably heard of Yule, and so near Christmas time. And so Yule is one of the 8 holy days, and it is representative of the winter solstice. Beltane is another one that people might know as May Day that is celebrated quite frequently. And so I'll definitely speak to how different names for them and how they show up in pop culture and in modern culture as well as in European history. Next up, the zodiac is the next circle outward from the pagan wheel of the year. And we've probably all heard of this one, somewhat familiar with the 12 zodiac signs. So each year the sun, as it travels through the ecliptic, from our perspective here on Earth, the sun travels through each of 12 zodiac signs in a certain order. And each sign corresponds with about 1 month of time. So right now we're in the very end of Pisces season, the last day, and we'll be entering Aries season tomorrow. And that will last about a month until mid-April. And so when the sun is changing from one sign to another and transiting through space so that it's embarking on another sign, we'll spend a little bit of more time talking about that sign. And then on the weeks that there's no changes in the zodiac, we won't speak to it as much, but I will always be sure to mention how the archetype of that sign is showing up in the week at hand. And if there happens to be a big event happening between other planets during the course of that week, like if there's other planets traveling through the same part of the sky as the sun, like Mercury or Venus, for example. I'll speak to that. But I'm mostly focusing on the sun's apparent movement around the earth throughout the year as the basis of this seasonal Cycles of Time podcast. I do want to mention, since we're talking about the zodiac here in this intro, is that I think, obviously if you're an astrologer or if you're an astrology nerd and listening to this, this might seem super simple and basic, so you can just kind of play a song in your head and zone out for a minute. But I just want to mention that I think when I started to get interested in astrology and I, was going deeper than just my sun sign horoscope from a newspaper, I kept hearing from people that the zodiac and astrology couldn't possibly be right because the stars where they were, 4,000 years ago in ancient Mesopotamia and Babylon and ancient Greece are in a different place of the sky during different seasons than they are now. So because of what's called the precession of the equinoxes, which is a wobble of the Earth's axis. So the Earth doesn't just spin perfectly on its axis, it has a bit of a wobble. And as it spins, we, over time, are seeing different constellations along the ecliptic, different star patterns than we were seeing 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. So I think there were some articles written about this a few years ago where they basically said, you think you know your sun sign? You think you're a Virgo? Well, actually, it's wrong. You're actually a Leo. Because of this wobble of the Earth, where you were born does not line up with the constellation that you think it does. It's changed since astrology was invented or created many, many millennia ago. And so I remember being a bit confused about that as well and never really could find a good answer about which one is right then? They're very different from each other. Leo is very different from Virgo. And although, yes, we contain all of these energies, we all contain all of them, it's also kind of like, wait a second, how could this make any sense as an art form dealing with personal traits and personality? And so basically, I now have an answer for this. And it is actually still the question that I get asked the most when I say I'm into astrology. People are just like, well, okay, sure, but, aren't the stars in a different place now than they were then? And so doesn't that kind of make the whole system completely void, right? Or what's the deal with that? And so I will tell you. So basically, there are different types of astrology that are studied. And the type that I'm going to be talking about in this podcast and that I work with most predominantly is called tropical astrology, or the tropical zodiac. And what it does is it maintains the ancient signs of the zodiac as the accurate ones for the dates today. It hasn't changed based on the changing precession of the equinoxes. And the reason for this is because it is fixed to the equinoxes and the solstices, which I just mentioned being really big pieces of these other philosophies of the medicine wheel and the whooshing cycle and the pagan wheel of the year, celebrating these times where we have the longest day or the shortest day, or when the two times of the year when the earth has equal day and night. So those are very pivotal and important days in the year for many, many cultures throughout history. And tropical astrology basically pins the zodiac to the equinoxes and the solstices, where every year the beginning of Aries season is on the spring equinox, even though the stars that are way, way further away than the planets and way, way further away than our sun, obviously. So those have shifted. from our perspective on Earth. But the equinoxes and the solstices are really what we are celebrating and what we are focusing on when we talk about these zodiac signs and these archetypes. And for me, that makes a lot of sense as I'm studying seasonality and studying cycles from a multicultural perspective. The tropical zodiac, it's kind of like a little, tiny violin sad moment sometimes when I have this technology of like a star tracker app on my iPhone and I point it up at the sky and I want, I'm like, ooh, the sun's entering Aries or Mercury's entering Aries, and I point it up and oops, it looks like Mercury from my point of view is actually against the backdrop of the Pisces constellation. And so it's kind of like, wait a second, that's confusing. But the way I like to think about it is, again, through this metaphor of the slices of pie of the year. And so in tropical astrology, a zodiac sign is slicing the 360-degree circle up into 12 pieces of 30 degrees each. And so each sign has 30 degrees, and that doesn't change. And it's basically a kind of mathematical calculation and breakdown of the archetypes of the seasons: Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, all the way through Pisces, that were created, over time and added to from the perspective of people in the Middle East and in Egypt and in Greece and in Crete and in Rome. And the stories evolved and changed over that time period, but they maintained, similar traits and attributes that to me really relate to the season at hand. So Aries to me feels really spring-like. It has a lot of symbolism and a lot of representation within those myths about spring. And so I hope that made sense. I am more than happy to clarify anything if anybody has any questions about the tropical zodiac and how it's based, seasonally rather than on the actual stars as they are in the current moment. But I do want to mention there is another branch, in India, Vedic astrology is the astrology, it's popular, and it uses the fixed stars as determinations for the signs of the zodiac. And sidereal astrology is another branch of astrology that also uses the stars in their current placement for the dates of the zodiac, which shifts when Aries season is, for example. In that system, we would still be in Pisces for almost another month, and Aries would come in later based on how much this Earth wobble has shifted our perspective of the stars. And so lots of people are into that type of astrology, and I think it's super relevant and valid and works. So, because it's not like the opposite. It's one 30-degree section off essentially from each other. And so the seasonal characteristics are still relevant. But for me, again, I'm a earth worshiper. I would call myself, again, an ecological astrologer. And in that way, I really relate to the tropical zodiac in the sense of it being stories and myths and connections of humans to our place on Earth and within the changing seasons, the changing plants and animals and landscapes. So one other way to think about this, just real quick before we dive into the next thing, is that, I really believe that the zodiac constellations and their myths were created mostly based on people's relationship with the seasons. And in that way, the equinox and solstices are more kind of relevant to our day-to-day life on Earth than the incredibly far-off stars that live beyond that. Just they're so far away. And so rather than thinking about like the stars and the constellations imparting energies and information to us from space in the kind of esoteric way, the way I look at it is that like the stars are kind of a backdrop or like the set of a play where if you're the audience here on Earth, Then the sun and the planets traveling across the ecliptic are the actors that are moving in front of that backdrop of stars. And so that backdrop is important, obviously, because it sets the environment for the actors. It tells us, if they're in spring or in winter. It tells a backdrop to a play would tell us, if we're in the woods or if we're on a mountain or by the ocean, or lots of different information about the action that's happening. But the most important thing about the set of a play or the backdrop of stars is really how it sets the environment for the actors and how the actors tell stories about their environment, how they relate to their environment. And so because we're looking at the cycles of time and through this historical perspective, I would say that the stories that have been told and evolved on and added to and adapted and adopted throughout different cultures of humanity is kind of, for me, just like why astrology is so interesting. And so shifting those away from the seasons and is something that makes a little bit less sense to me. But we're always evolving, and there's no right or wrong way. Our philosophies and perspectives are always evolving. And like, for example, another example of this evolution is that in ancient astrology during this time, we didn't have telescopes and we didn't have scientific instruments to look out into space beyond the naked eye. And so the ancient astrology system only uses 7 planets, or 7 celestial bodies rather than the 10 that we have today. So, the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Saturn, Jupiter. I think I didn't miss any there. I'm not reading this, it's in my head. But I now, since the 1800s, we have been able to witness with our telescopes Uranus and Neptune and Pluto. And so now those are within the system of modern astrology. And since then, we've had to culturally assign kind of which signs are related or ruled by these outer planets that we didn't used to be able to see. And so, there's some battles there between traditional astrologers who look at the Hellenistic or Greek methods as the way to be, or the modern astrologers who take in all this new information. And again, I don't think one is right or wrong, but I just wanted to kind of clarify which system I'm thinking about when I'm really attributing these zodiac signs to the seasons in this wheel that I've created. Zodiac. Yes, I love it. Definitely send me questions on that stuff at Cycles of Time podcast on Instagram or on my website. And yeah, I look forward to starting a dialogue, but I hope that explained it to people who are still a little bit confused about that. So yeah, we'll go through the zodiac, starting with Aries season and moving all the way through Pisces season and then starting again at Aries season. So that'll take a year. And we'll also consider, I'm not going to go too much into the moon here because we are tracking solar seasons, but if there is a new moon where the moon is conjunct or right next to the sun in the sky from our point of view, or if there's a full moon where the moon is in the exact opposite side of the sky as the sun is transiting through, then I will mention those as well and kind of talk a little bit about the cultural interpretations in indigenous cultures of the names of these moons, of what these moons mean as they relate to the plants and animals and weather of this season, because I find that really relevant. So finally, the outer circle of the wheel, of the Cycles of Time wheel that I've created, is a series of numbers that are the I Ching hexagrams, or also known as human design gates. And The I Ching is, again, an ancient divination system that dates back 5,000 years ago. And it's one of the oldest books, if not the oldest book in the world. And it's made up of 64 hexagrams that are called hexagrams instead of chapters, or instead of just poems or something. They're called hexagrams because they're each a figure made up of 6 broken or unbroken lines. And these lines represent yin or yang, respectively. So yang is a solid line and yin is a broken line. And the combinations of these lines, of these 6 lines together, make up 64, the number 64. And so those numbers are placed around the wheel of the zodiac. This is something that if you have seen a human design graph or chart and you're into that at all, it's becoming more and more and more popular. This system, everybody's calling human design like the new astrology. Again, human design is a system that combines astrology, the zodiac, with the I Ching, with the Hindu Brahman chakra system, and with quantum physics, and really is a synthesis of this. So, it's not a surprise that I find it fascinating. But I also like the visual nature of it. I discovered the system by seeing what's called a body graph, or the chart, from the human design perspective. And I was just like, ooh, that is cool looking. What is that? And what it is it's a shape of a body with all of the chakras or energy centers lit up within it. And then around the edge of it, there's oftentimes a circle, which is 64 numbers. And I kind of looked at that and said, okay, cool. That's going around the zodiac. There's the zodiac wheel that I recognize. And outside of that are these 64 numbers. And then I noticed that they're not in order from 1 to 64 around the wheel, but they're in what seems like a random order if you're just looking at the numbers in the kind of alpha numeric system and not in the hexagrams. And they're just, they go from 25 to 17 to 21 to 51. And I remember thinking, why? Like, what is that order all about? And I couldn't really find that information, and too quickly and looked into I Ching resources as well, and couldn't find that offhand. And so I went to a conference on human design last summer here in Santa Fe and asked a lot of people, and they weren't quite able to answer me either about why the ordering was, seemingly so random. But eventually I found out that it is an ancient sequence of these hexagrams, and of these, each hexagram is like a philosophical tenet for living a good life in harmony with nature and in harmony with other people. And so initially, these were in a certain sequence, and then they were changed into another sequence throughout the history of ancient China. And the sequence that they're in the cycles of time wheel that I've created, as well as the human design wheels, is called the Fuxi sequence, or the binary sequence. And it's named after China's first emperor, who was a godlike mythological emperor. Fuxi was half man, half dragon, or half serpent, and lived about 5,000 years ago. And this emperor was created with creating humanity actually out of clay, and inventing music and hunting and fishing and domestication and cooking and many other things. Yeah, he's a very well-revered creator god figure. And according to legend, one day he saw a dragon horse rise from the Yellow River, and on the side of the horse were markings that inspired the earliest version of the I Ching, of these marks and symbols. About 2,000 years later, there were significant changes made to the original I Ching by King Wen, who basically was imprisoned in the capital for 7 years, where he studied the I Ching and rearranged the 64 hexagrams in an order that kind of seems arbitrary. And then he wrote lots of commentaries on the hexagrams. So you will see the King 1 sequence in the I Ching and the Fuxi sequence, and they're different sequences. But we're using the old, mythological old one that was created by this Fuxi. And it is a binary code as well. So it basically, hexagrams are created of 2 trigrams, so basically 2 sets of 3 lines. And the way that the sequence works around the wheel is that all of the bottom trigram are together, and then the top trigram changes. And then it shifts to another bottom trigram, and the top part changes. And so it's kind of like a binary code in that way. And it's really interesting. I will post this in the show notes as well, but an image of a grid of the Fuxi sequence as well as this cyclical wheel of the Fuxi sequence. And when you just take a look at it, you can visually see why the numbers are in this order. So basically, as we look at these hexagrams, which are called gates in human design. So I'll be using hexagram or gate kind of interchangeably, and probably using gate more frequently just because it's a shorter word. But basically they're arranged around the wheel of the year in this original order, the Fuxi sequence. And for our purposes here, as the sun moves around the ecliptic from our point of view on Earth, it's moving around the zodiac, and it's moving through each one of the gates in this particular order. And just like it moves through the signs of the zodiac in a particular order. And so because of this, we'll be learning from the energies of a different gate or hexagram each week. And sometimes there'll be 2 hexagrams or gates that we're talking about, because there are 52 weeks in the Gregorian calendar, 52 weeks of this podcast, and 64 hexagrams. So we have sometimes 2 per week that we'll dive into. So that is the format. And it is, I heard from a couple people that listen to this that they're like, oh, I'm going to take notes next time. And I'm not trying to overwhelm with any information. But again, this is just for the episode 1 and the introduction. Really want to get to the basics and simplify how I'm coming up with this, because it's a new combination of ways of thinking. And over time, we'll just sink into getting into the reading immediately about what this means for you. So it's not going to be a lecture series every week by any means. But yeah, that's basically slicing up the pie from all of the different philosophies and all of the cycles of time. These 4 indigenous seasons and 5 Taoist elements, the 8 European pagan Sabbaths, 12 Babylonian or Greek zodiac signs, 13 moons of the year, and 64 hexagrams or gates. I do also want to note that, some of these won't change every week. Like I mentioned earlier, we won't have a new season every week or a new zodiac sign every week or a new pagan holiday each week, but we will have a new I Ching gate each week, which is kind of just feels like a hyper-specific interpretation of, that part of the year. 1/64th of a pie is a really small slice, but it allows us to get really zoned in and specific to the energy that week. So I'm really excited to, learn more about all of these I Ching hexagrams as we go, because I'm definitely not an expert, like I said, and I'm coming along for the ride and have read a lot of books on this, but also it could be a lifelong study of just going through the I Ching. And so I'm just looking at it as an opportunity to learn as we go, and would love to hear back from any of you who feel like you have some insights about it. So definitely contact me if you'd like to chat about the I Ching or human design as far as the modern interpretation of that goes. So All that being said, timestamp here. We'll get that in the show notes where the timestamp of the actual reading begins. But let's just get into the week ahead, March 18th through 24th, 2024. This week contains potent energy and big transitions as spring begins. In the medicine wheel, spring is the direction east. It's the direction related to the element earth, to childhood, to the color yellow, and to the physical realm. In the 5-element Taoist cycle this week, we are in the season of wood. This season of the wheel of the year is represented by the element wood. And wood is symbolic of spring in the sense that it comes after water and before fire. And all of these cycles are a gradient of time, obviously, and there's not hard endings and beginnings. And that's especially clear in the 5-element cycle, where the element wood absorbs the water of winter, and then after it's absorbed and kind of its roots have been underground, the trees begin to sprout up and grow in spring. And so it has this very growth-oriented quality, this element. And in China, the Lunar New Year happened back in February. And so it is not actually, it's also, Lunar New Year is considered also called Spring Festival in China. And so the Lunar New Year in February was actually the onset of spring. So it already, in that tradition, spring arrived over a month ago, not necessarily on the equinox today. And I won't talk a ton about the Chinese zodiac here on the podcast because it is a complex 60-year cycle rather than an annual cycle, with each year being represented by one of 12 animals and one of the 5 elements. And so I'm not going to go too deeply into that here, but I do want to mention that the elements of wood, fire, earth, metal, and water are the same elements used in the Chinese zodiac system, and each year has an element attributed to it. So starting last month in February 2024, we transitioned to a new year from the year of the water rabbit to the year of the wood dragon. And dragon energy is powerful and optimistic and filled with a certain force, and wood has a very similar kind of parallel energy to that dragon. And because we're in a wood year, this spring-like energy associated with growth is going to be strong throughout this entire year of 2024 and into early 2025. And so it's kind of doubling down on that wood element of the just potential for growth and reaching upward. In the pagan wheel of the year, moving on there now, we're celebrating the spring Sabbath of Ostara, and it is happening this Tuesday on the 19th of March on the Spring Equinox, which is also when Aries season begins. And so all of these things are happening tomorrow, Tuesday the 19th. It's a very exciting, very big day. Ostara is the celebration of the German goddess Esther, and is also the origins of the Christian celebration of Easter. And so the last holiday was a cross-quarter day called Imbolc, which signified the very beginning of spring. And Ostara kind of symbolizes mid-spring and the equinox, and it is associated with bunnies and ducks and eggs and fertility and a lot of the things that are associated with Easter in the Christian tradition, as far as kind of how pop culture celebrates Easter. That actually dates back pre-Christian times to Ostara. And Ostara is a great time of the year to plant seeds for the future, whether literal or metaphorical. So I just planted some seeds not too long ago in a flat to be able to transfer outside when it gets warm enough, but watching little seeds sprout is so perfect for this season. And also planting seeds of intention for the year ahead in your life is a great thing to be doing on Ostara. It's also a really great time for that quintessential spring cleaning. I know I feel very, very it's very necessary to get a lot of the clutter out of the house right now. It's kind of become an obsession. Just all of a sudden, the weather's getting warmer, spring is here, and it's time to get, all the things that have collected dust over winter, just kind of out of the space to create, as baby seeds are growing. For example, you need to do some pruning so that the bits of, the seeds don't crowd each other out, the sprouts don't crowd each other out, and so that one or two of the sprouts will have the better chance at being a thriving, bigger plant. And so if we think of this time as a cleaning and pruning time as the seeds begin to grow, it's a really beautiful visual and a beautiful metaphor. So moving on to the zodiac as the wheel out from the pagan wheel of the year, in the tropical zodiac, like I mentioned, spring equinox is always the first day of Aries season. And Aries is represented by the ram. Aries is the first sign of the zodiac. And in the cycle of a human life, Aries being the first sign represents birth and infancy. And in the life cycle of a plant, Aries represents kind of this sprout bursting out of a seed. I really love looking at the glyph of Aries, which is kind of looks like a V with curved wings. They kind of really look a lot like ram horns, which it does represent. But to me, it also looks like a sprouting seed, like a dicot sprout coming out of the earth during the season. You look around and you see little Aries symbols everywhere. And so you really think about Aries as a sign that is filled with energy, just so much energy and enthusiasm and the ability to start things and catalyze things. There's a certain hunger and urgency and almost impatience to Aries, and a certain drive. And I think about like how much energy, what a spark it would require to open up a seed that has been sitting there and send roots down and send sprouts upward. And so looking at Aries from an ecological perspective, it's really just, that catalytic spark. Aries is a cardinal fire sign. And in astrology, there are 4 elements, different from the Chinese 5 elements, but there's 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water. And there are 3 modalities, which are cardinal, fixed, and mutable. And the cardinal signs are the signs that initiate a new quarter of the year. So Aries initiates spring. Another cardinal sign is Cancer, which initiates summer. And another cardinal sign is Libra, which initiates fall. And then Capricorn, which initiates winter. And so all of these being cardinal signs means that they're the starters of the zodiac, and Aries is the starter of the spring season. And being a fire sign, it reminds me of like the strike of a match, just a spark that drives everything forward. So the energy that we're in right now this week is really just, kind of something coming from nothing or seemingly nothing. The seed sprouting, the match striking, the ram butting its horns into up the mountain. And so I really am feeling it, and it aligns with all of these other systems so beautifully. I also love to look at the astrology that we're currently in as far as how it corresponds with the body. So since ancient times, there has been a study of medical astrology where attributes from a sign in the sky are placed on the body. And it starts with Aries in the head and works its way down to Pisces in the feet. And so, yeah, in the body, Aries rules our head, which is, again, evocative of new beginnings. When you think of birth, we need to use our heads to come out of the womb and into the world. Most births, not all births, obviously, but our head is what is responsible for helping us initiate into a new cycle of life. And, the ram's horns are on its head. You can really remember Aries being the head because it's, you look at a ram and it's just like it's moving forward with those horns, kind of horns down, head forward, let's go, not really looking too much at what is to come. And Aries also in the body rules our muscles and blood. And the planetary ruler of Aries is Mars. And so I like to think of Mars is a red planet and our muscles and our blood are red. And there's a certain energy behind the color red that is just, really about energy and holds a lot of drive in it. So, and with birth, there is blood, right? There is red. There's the color red as we begin anew. And so, that's a little bit about Aries, a little about kind of the current energy of the season as it relates to the ram. Hungry, enthusiastic, energetic. And another word that corresponds with the Aries being the baby of the zodiac, the infant, the first sign, is innocence. And there's a certain, people with Aries placements, we all contain some Aries in our chart. We all are affected by the energy of Aries. But if people have strong Aries placements, there is a certain kind of innocence to them as far as just like really being optimistic and wide-eyed and looking for, what's around that you could love, right? And what's interesting about that and thinking about Aries within that framework is that the I Ching and human design gate that corresponds with this first week of Aries, it corresponds with the spring equinox, is the gate of innocence. It's known as Wu Wang in the Chinese hexagram. And it is an archetype, this gate 25, that radiates gentleness, and it has like childlike innocence, a deep trust in the universe, because again, we've just come out of the womb. We've just come from the seed that's planted underground and are very fresh in this world. There's a whole new set of senses to take in the world, but we are ultimately in Aries season, in love with the world without discriminating. And kind of the energy behind this gate of innocence and this hexagram is about universal love. And sometimes there's a challenge in this archetype and within Aries as well, even this time of year, just kind of understanding why other people do the things they do, and kind of a confusion when something feels like it's not coming out of love. And so this gate of innocence indicates like this time being really like there's a certain naivete in the air, where, well, as we come out of the darkness, come out of the dark time of the year, come out of winter, we are bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and very wide-eyed and learning about discernment. But there's a deep optimism that comes from being alive. And so I would like to read a little bit of a passage from a book by Carrie Hone, who's author of the book essential I Ching 64 degrees of nature's wisdom to kind of contemplate this hexagram and see how it relates to spring equinox and wood element and Ostara and Aries season. And I just really loved some of the wording here, so I'll just read a little bit of this passage for today and let you kind of soak in the wisdom of innocence, and then we'll wrap up for this week. So from Carrie Hone, it says, when you turn back, you are returned to a state of innocence. If you don't know what cannot be done, you will accomplish great things. Like a kite cut from the string, lightly the soul of my youth has taken flight. And that's a quote by Ishikawa Tabukobu. Approaching the gateway of perception, you can cherish the opportunity not to know, to move beyond all sense of boundaries. Baby birds do not develop their colorful beaks and feathers until adolescence, when the territorial urge begins. Until then, their coloring allows them to remain hidden and protected. This is the protection offered to a state of innocence. Like a hatchling protected from early danger, you can approach the threshold of perception with a sense of discovery. The master said, "Those who do not know what cannot be done can accomplish great things." Wu Wang means not attached or not caught up in defending yourself against unfolding events. Exerting your will can sometimes create disharmony in the flow of life. And when you're unattached, you can observe the fundamental harmony of what unfolds naturally. The master said, "Those who know no limits meet no obstruction," and this state of innocence ensures your success. Innocence allows us to see how events cultivate the power of your internal knowing. They require three things. This innocence requires three things, which is first, compassion when relating to others. Secondly, an appreciation for the uncarved block or the ever-changing aspect of life by remaining simple in desires and not playing the host, but remaining the guest of a greater unfolding. Even when you are the ruler of your empire, you do not dare take the lead, but follow. You can discover a new way of perceiving the world where a return to a state of innocence will allow you to cultivate what is to come. One who possesses virtue and abundance is comparable to a newborn babe. The baby goes without knowing where it is going and merges with the surroundings, moving along with it. Wu Wang is the image of not wasting time lost on the bypaths where you wander away from where you need to be. Unattached to that place that would generate a response, you do not contend, and therefore nothing blocks your way. Like a baby that has not learned to smile, move to that place before the response to participate with how life is shaping you. Although desire brings you to observe life's manifestations, having no attachment to the passing scenery is key to your success this week. So Wu Wang, as you heard in the passage, means not attached, and that is what innocence means. It's just fresh newness. And Wu Wei, which is a tenet of Taoism, means taking no unnatural action and kind of going with the flow, essentially, which allows us to move forward unattached to the past and not creating kind of an unnecessary response. Let go of what you believe cannot be done, and you will accomplish great things. I just thought that was beautiful phrasing of what the innocent means, what the gate of innocence means, and I really resonate with the baby birds not having any color and just being able to blend in and really being able to flow with life in this time of the year where it can feel, again, challenging to transition from winter to spring. As much as we're energized and excited about it, there's also a certain amount of like, whoa, what am I leaving behind? What do I have to throw away in my spring cleaning? How do I have to prune myself for this new year? Thinking about New Year's resolutions back in January, felt completely out of touch with where I was in my body. But at this point, there's a certain natural pruning that is aligned with the ecology of the season as it grows from one year to the next, from one period of darkness to a new period of light. And, sometimes we want to go back home. We want to crawl back into the womb. We want to crawl back underground. We're like, it's too hot out here. It is too bright. There are too many crazy things going on. And I would just really like to crawl back into what was before. But this week reminds us that we cannot go backwards. We must go forward. We must grow upward like the wood, like the plants, like the bunnies, and that's okay. And it's much easier done with a spirit of innocence and a spirit of not trying to put our willpower onto everything that's happening this week, of just really looking around as if you're a newborn baby and noticing the contrast between the leaves and the colors and the textures. And with that, I will leave you to the simple, to doing that this week. And again, thank you for coming with me along for this journey of laying out the framework for this study and getting a little nerdy with me and getting a little bit into the weeds, more like into the roots rather than the weeds. I think on this last day of Pisces season, before we enter Aries season in spring, we are deep in the roots. We are still deep underground. And so that's a perfect day to be going there as far as the roots of these traditions and the foundation and the roots for how this podcast will be laid out. And next week, we'll just begin with the forecast without too much rigmarole. And next week is another exciting week, starting Monday the 25th. We have a lunar eclipse in Libra. So as the sun continues through the east and continues through Aries season, continues through the season of Ostara, we have a full moon in the opposite side of the sky from Aries, the opposite side of the ecliptic, and the opposite of Aries is Libra. So we will talk about this full moon. I definitely do like talking about full moons as we trace the sun through the wheel of the year, because full moons are always in the sign that is opposite to the season that we're in. So the moon, in order to be full, has to be across the ecliptic on the other side of the wheel to have the sun shine on it. And so as the sun continues to move through Aries and all of the seasons that are associated with Aries, we have a reflection from the other side of the sky, kind of a mirror with the full moon in Libra. And it's beautiful to kind of see that perspective. And eclipses, the fact that the first full moon of the astrological new year is an eclipse is very potent energy. And eclipses are kind of like a power outage, where you're in a room, the lights go out and it's completely dark, and then when the lights come back on again, you kind of are seeing things from a fresh perspective. So there's a lot of kind of great leaps that can happen within the energy of eclipses, which is already pretty potent energy, being a full moon. And so, we'll dig into that next week. So go ahead and click subscribe here, or subscribe to the transcript and image resources by going to astrosomatics.substack.com to get this podcast and related resources in your inbox every week. I will see you then. Have a beautiful, beautiful week filled with innocence and beauty and new beginnings. And I'll talk to you all again soon. Bye.